Welcome to Fishing in Germany, and this is the third and final part of this three-part series of videos. And I'm going to go into what I reluctantly will call nuisance fish, because they're fish we will get on our hook very easily when we don't want them. They're not really nuisances, they're good, but yeah, when you're fishing for something and these get on your hook, it's kind of annoying. Um, Part one, I went into predator fish. Part two, into non-predatory fish, and this is the final part into what I will just call nuisance fish for the sake of a name. So there's going to be more than I list here, but these are the common ones I come across. We have, I'm going to start with Gründlinge, and in English that is gudgeon. Um, you might have to look it up. It's I've never seen them before until I was in Germany, and these guys, they'll get on my hook when I'm bottom fishing, especially at night. Usually, if I'm using a worm, they'll get on the hook. They're small, they don't get very big, and they have a big mouth, so they'll get on a nice size hook. So if I'm getting a lot of these, the thing with these guys that drives me crazy is they don't fight very much. So you think your line's just sitting there, and maybe you won't even notice a bite indication. And it's one of those things where you just finally reel in to check your line, and it's like there's a fish there. You don't even feel it. The same goes for Kaulbarsch, and in English this is Ruffe or Eurasian Ruffe. I don't know how if I'm saying that right. Ruffe, and in German Kaulbarsch. So it looks like it is in the bass family. Um, I even read descriptions of it looking like a small zander, like a small walleye or something, and it kind of does. They're interesting looking fish. It does look like a small bass, and they have the dorsal spikes, so you have to be careful when you grab them, even though they're small. They're really sharp, and they have something in them that just kind of irritates the skin. Um, they have really unique eyes, and usually, again, I catch these at night. It's very common at night when they start getting active. Um, and yeah, they have a big mouth as well, so they'll get on worms all the time. When I'm getting a lot of problems with these guys, usually that's where I switch to corn, and it avoids it. When they're out though, and again, I'll have no bite at all and reel in, and there's one on the line, and it's just sitting there like hanging out. It's very common. Um, Both of these fish are not protected. They're allowed to catch. There's no size limitation on them. There's not much you can do with them because they do not get big. The Kaulbarsch get a little bit fatter, but there's not a whole lot you can do with them other than I guess you could. I've used them in soup. I've used them as bait. That works. Um, then we have Schneider. Schneider in English is Bleak. These are usually not at the bottom; they're at the top. They're usually close to the shore, and they're in schools. And yeah, they'll bite any small hook. If you're fishing for trout or something with the small bait, you'll get those. They don't get big at all. They're like little minnows basically. Those are protected. You cannot keep them. They're protected in Germany. You're not allowed to keep them. So if you catch one, you got to take it off the hook and throw it back. Um, all these fish. Oh wait, before I finish, go into that anyways. Another one that could be a problem is roach or rudd, which is our Rotfeder or Rotaugen. Rotaugen is roach in German with the red eyes. Rotfeder is rudd with red fins. They look similar, they act similar, they're very similar. And those can be in huge schools, and they go into feeding frenzy. So if you're, especially if you're not bottom fishing, if you're fishing closer to the surface, those guys go crazy at your line. Um, they, they get considerable size. There is a size limit on them as well. I think it's 15 centimeters off the top of my head. I could be wrong. Um, but yeah, I mean, those normally they work as good bait fish as well. Um, they're very bony, so it's hard to really make a meal out of them. There's ways of pickling them or drying them that you can get past the bone problem. And then finally there's Schwarzmund-Grundel. The Schwarzmund-Grundel is, in English, I believe it translates to Goby. Those are a whole thing on its own. only seen those, and I think that's the only place you'll find them in Germany is on the Rhine River. The Grundel, 15 years ago, it didn't exist here. They came from the Black Sea, and I can't remember. I think it's over like the last 7 years or so. The fishermen are saying, "Oh, these are a real problem. They're a huge problem. They're almost like an infestation there." So I was just looking up some facts on it. 60% of the fish caught on the Rhine are Grundel, and they're real. A lot of people are very unhappy about it if they fish on the Rhine because it's really hard to fish there without getting those constantly on your hook. Again, these also have a very big mouth for their size. They do not get big, but they have a huge mouth. They look almost like what's that? A sea teufel. A monkfish, but much smaller. They do not taste bad, but I mean it's a small fish. I've kept them as I go. You don't really want to throw those back in the Rhine. There's too many. If you have enough of them, say like 20 or 30, you can smoke them, and they are actually really good. Put them in brine for a few hours at least, and then put them in a smoker, and they're good. You can eat them. You just cut the head off basically. When you cut the back of the head, don't cut all the way through, and you just rip the rest. All the viscera comes out, and I brine them and smoke them and eat everything except basically the tail. They're actually really good. But you could literally just put an empty hook in the water and you'll catch one there. So if there's a worm or any bait on your line, they're gonna get you, and it's hard to fish there because your line is constantly covered in Grundel. They even have competitions of how many people can catch in a certain amount of time. They're not that fun to catch. They barely fight. You spend more time just getting them off your hook and rebaiting than catching them. But they are edible. They also work good as bait. One positive thing about actually all these fish, they all have something that's positive about them. With Grundel, that's positive is they are attracting more and more of Wels catfish. So between that and from industrialization on the Rhine, the temperature's rising. There's been an increase in really big Wels on the Rhine. Grundel makes a really good food for them. One other way to get past the Grundel, if I'm fishing on the Rhine, which is a much bigger river, is just cast further out. They're bottom fish, and they're usually closer to the sides of the river. When we have like a big population of other fish that are what we call nuisance fish here, such as the Schneider or the roaches or any of those, that also attracts predator fish. So that's also a plus to it. When there's all these little fish around, they're going to be a pain on your bait. Sometimes switching up the bait, switching up where you're fishing, that helps, but it's also going to attract those predator fish. One of my favorite spots on the river here, when I'm throwing bait out, especially in the summer, the late fall, the Schneider, for example, how do we call those? Bleak. They're very active and they're all over. You throw a piece. That's where I can find. That's a good spot where I throw a piece of bread in the water and you just see it get attacked immediately. It's good. And so when I throw like some fish food out for carp or bream or barbel, as soon as it hits the water, it's like clockwork. It's a splash of the bait, then all these jumping fish, and then usually something like a pike jumps and grabs some fish. So that's a really, they're good indicators of good spots to fish. But that's it for this 3-part series. Thanks for watching.